Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hi. Okay. Setting the tone here. We're going to have a good time tonight. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book first and how it came to be. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about these guys. And then, let's see, what am I going to do? Oh, then I'm going to ask them some stuff and we'll talk. It'll be fun. So, about the book. How many people in this room are not writing a book right now? Okay, some civilians, this is great. You must have a lot of fans, because I don't know very many.
Don't blame it on me.
So this is how this book came to be. I became fixated on the idea of writing a memoir or a histoire of Françoise Sagan. Does anybody here know who Françoise Sagan is? See? Okay, well, Linda, my wonderful agent, read my proposal for the Françoise Sagan history, and she was very nice about it about 3 rounds in, and then she finally said, "You're not going to sell this book." And I was devastated. I couldn't let it go, and I was like carrying it around and sending it to editors myself with Linda's permission, of course, and doing everything I could to get it published. I'm telling you this because this is kind of a publishing story for our times. The reason nobody wanted to read or buy the Françoise Sagan book is that nobody knew who she was, or the people who buy books don't know who she was, which is kind of why I wanted to do the book. But anyway, so finally when Linda broke this heartbreaking news to me, she said, and she never says no, she will carry everything to the, well, you do say no, but not that early usually. She asked me a very good question, which was, what is it about this book that you're so attached to? Why can't you let this go? What is the germ of this book that is so important to you? And I realized it was, the germ of the book was that my parents had really boring books in their house, and when I was growing up, and they had one really good book in their house, which was Bonjour Tristesse. How many people here have read Bonjour Tristesse? See. It's not her fault. The editors didn't want it either. But anyway, so I realized that that book is what made me a writer. She wrote it when she was 19, or she published it when she was 19. It was about some topics that were fairly risque for a 12-year-old on the Upper East Side in 19, whatever it was, a long time ago. And reading the book, both in terms of the book itself and the fact that she had published it when she was 19 and what it was about, all of it made me think I can do that, or at least that I want to do that. And so I answered Linda's question and I said, well, the germ of it really is what makes people turn into writers. And so this idea was born. And it was sort of like when you're really broke and you look around your house and you say, what can I take, the bottles back to the store, or what can I return, this still has a tag on it, or whatever. My career was sort of like that at that point, and I thought, well, what do I have that I can, capitalize on? And what I had was really good relationships with publicists, because I review books for People magazine, and ever since Oprah stopped doing what she did, People magazine is one of the few things that sells books. So I had a lot of publicists who wanted to do something nice for me, and so I thought I might have access to some of the people who normally don't give interviews because their publicists would make them. Then I also had some really generous friends. Kathryn, Harrison, and Jenny Egan in particular were sort of, I was looking at this like building a mall, and when you're going to propose a mall, you have to have your anchor stores, your Macy's and your Nordstroms, and Jenny and Kathryn both offered to be my Macy's and Nordstroms, so that I could say that they were in, and they weren't even sure they were in, but they would say, I could say they were in, and then I could go get other people. And so I just started asking people I knew, people I didn't know. Meg Wolitzer's here. Anybody here who has not, anybody here hasn't read Meg Wolitzer is in for a big treat with her new book. And some people I didn't know and had never heard of. The object of the game for me, as soon as I thought about the book, was to deal with the big issue of the time in the little insular book world, which was Franzenfreud. Does anybody here, does that ring a bell with anybody? Raise your hand if it rings a bell. Okay, I just have to know what I'm dealing with here. So, Jonathan Franzen had just published his second big fat novel, The Corrections, and, is that right? Freedom. And he got 2 reviews in the New York Times, like in the same week or something, and there became this big fuss, rightly so, on Twitter and just in general, about why it is that male writers who write about domestic dramas get 2 reviews in the Times, and female writers like Jennifer Weiner and Jodi Picoult, who write about domestic dramas, don't. And so I was very aware of that when I was having the idea for this book, and I was thinking, not only is this an issue of sexism or racism, because very few writers of color get reviewed also, but it's also an issue of balkanization of taste. Like, those who read Jodi Picoult are not supposed to read Rick Moody, and vice versa, and so on and so forth. So I sort of had this little, like, you know, it was the Obama time, everybody was being nonpartisan, everybody loved each other. So I was going to take these covers of a book and put all these writers in it in the same place, and they were going to play nicely together. And I was going to ask them all the same questions about why they write, and see, I was hoping and praying that all of them would have pretty much the same motivations, which, glory be, they did, and they do. Some of the writers I've never heard of, like I'd never heard of David Baldacci. Anybody here heard of David Baldacci? Yeah, I guess a lot of people have, because apparently he sells books by the millions. And he's also a corporation. When I call him, I don't call him, I call Inc. Baldacci Inc. But like, I've never read him, and I never probably will read him, but that doesn't mean he shouldn't get books published, as far as I'm concerned, and maybe I would even like him if I read him, and so on. So every time I got someone in my mall, like if I got Nordstrom's, then I wanted to also have like JCPenney or even Forever 21. You know, I wanted to have, like, I wanted to show that reading is reading and writing is writing, and, you know, we should all be able to hold hands and sing Kumbaya around the literary table. So anyway, it pretty much worked out. Almost everybody I asked said yes, which was wonderful. And let's see. So yeah, and what was happening at that time was I was finishing, I published a bunch of nonfiction books, but I was writing, or I wasn't writing my first novel, I was writing the first novel I was writing that was ever going to be published, and but not the last. And I was doing these interviews, and it was just so amazing and great. Everything I was learning I was just pouring it into the last revisions of the novel, and I was thinking there's probably other people out there who are writing books and could maybe pour some of this stuff into their work. So, so that's kind of the story of how the book came to be, and why these 2 people, rarely seen in public and never seen before in public together. You know, Kathryn and James are a perfect example of what I was wanting to do with this book, and both of them, I think the people in the room who are writers will understand when I say they don't need to be here, and they both are doing it as human beings. The book is a benefit for 826 National, which we will have information about that in the back when you buy your multiple copies of the book, because it's a benefit for youth literacy programs. And so I asked them both to come, and they've never met before, is that right? No. Yeah. And they're both doing it out of, you know, just like being really good human beings. I met James the first time in 2002 when A Million Little Pieces was just coming out, and I used to have a deal with the owners of my local Berkeley bookstore, Cody's, defunct sadly, where when I needed blurbs for my next book, I would offer to introduce whoever was coming through town on book tour in exchange for a few minutes in the green room with them before the reading, and then I would, you know, hit them up for a blurb. And in exchange for that, Cody's didn't have to pay a bookseller to be there at night and introduce the person. So that's how I met James, and I was writing a book about teenagers and drugs, and he generously gave me a blurb, and when I approached him about doing a contribution to this book, we had what I thought was a really kind of exemplary interaction about it, because when I first wrote the introduction to his chapter, he didn't like it at all, and he could have bailed, or I could have said never mind, but I felt it was a really good moment for me. I felt like, there's hope for the Republicans. Or something. We hung in there and we just worked it out. And with Kathryn, the way I met Kathryn was that I wrote her a fan letter. I was a huge, enormous devotee of all of her books. And I was writing a nonfiction book that I couldn't find a form for. It was 2 nonfiction books ago, or 1 nonfiction book ago. And she wrote this book that got not nearly enough of what it should have gotten, called While They Slept. Yes? Okay. And it was very much like what I wanted to do. And so I wrote her a letter and said, I don't think I even used my suck-up publicist contact, and said, told her how I felt about her work and told her what I was trying to do, and we just started communicating. That's how we got to know each other. So in both cases, this is a story of, writers whom I admire for different reasons, and both of whom are very important in my book, and I hope in yours, to the canon of American literature, for different reasons. Both are here tonight because they're human beings and they're good people. And I just want to say thank you. And the one thing I think they have in common, besides both being writers, is that I think they're both famous for the wrong reasons. Having to do with controversy more than, or at least equal to, the quality of their writing. So I encourage you to read both of them in their entirety if you haven't yet. Okay, so, oh yeah, there's another funny thing that I realized when I was sort of researching you guys today. Apparently you wrote your first novel and then realized it should have been nonfiction. Is that true?
Oh.
Sort of, yeah.
It's
sort of
the genesis of the Kiss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you wrote a novel that was turned into nonfiction. So there you have it. Goodbye out. Okay. All right. So.
And before we say anything, thank you all for coming.
Yes.
It's New York City. There's a lot of shit to do. We could have found something else to do, and I think all of us appreciate the fact that you chose to spend the night with us. So thank you.
He speaks for all of us. Thank you, James. So one thing I do want to talk with both of you about is, because you are both known for, or you're very associated with controversial work, how the external pressures of the world come to bear when you're actually sitting in the chair. This is another thing I just want to say about they have in common. They're both workhorses. They both work really hard. They plunk their butts in the chair and they stay there until they're done. So I wonder, when you're in the chair, especially having a body of work behind you, having accrued some controversy around you, how does that affect your ability to do what you have to do in order to produce writing?
You want me to go or you go? Sure. How does the external world affect me? In many ways it doesn't affect me at all. Like, before I write a book, I don't know how to describe this, but I have the book in my head. Like, I wait until I know the whole book's there, and then I start. And I always say the process of writing is just sitting there long enough to get it right. And the external world, in terms of, like, I don't ever give a shit about a review. When I'm writing a book, I don't think anything about that. It's like, you worry about the next word, and then the next sentence, and the next paragraph. And especially, I didn't go to writing school, or I just taught myself to write, and I taught myself to write. It took 10 years or so by sitting in a room by myself, without the outside world caring or knowing or having any influence on me at all. And
So you wrote for 10 years before you were published.
Yeah. Yeah. And in other ways, the external world like helps me. It makes me mad. I remember after the controversies related to my first two books, I took great pride in reading things that said, "You're done. It's over. It's finished." And it helped. And I mean, the process of writing A Million Little Pieces is one of the coolest things I've ever done in my life. Like, literally just sitting alone. I didn't have any money. Nobody gave a shit. I was writing this book. My friends thought I was kind of an idiot. I had a relatively successful like Hollywood career, and I quit. And I was like, I'm gonna go write this book. I'm finally ready to write this book. And I liked it. Nobody gave a shit. It was just me and a computer. And so when I was after the controversies, I was like, I'm gonna show all those motherfuckers. Like, I'm gonna show every one of those motherfuckers, and I'm gonna come out with my fingers up, and I'm gonna make sure whatever I do shuts them up.
And when you say shuts them up, do you mean by the quality of what you were producing? Do you mean by sales?
Both.
Do you mean, yeah?
I mean, when that book came out, and I got the best review I've ever gotten in my life. Top of the page, Janet Maslin, and she was like, "You hit it out of the park. Great book. All this shit." And so that took care of one side of it, and then the book hit #1, and that took care of the other side of it, and it was satisfying. On the other hand, like if any of you are writers, if you worry about the world, you're gonna fuck yourself up. Like, you can't sit there and think, what is somebody gonna think about what I'm doing? When I was writing that book, it wasn't, what is somebody gonna think about what I'm doing? It was, okay, make it good enough so that when you give people the finger, you have weight behind you. But when you're writing a book, I believe, and you can chime in, both of you, like, you can't worry about a review, you can't worry about a publisher, you can't worry about sales, you can't worry about what anybody's gonna think, or it changes what you're doing, and it fucks you up. Like, I always tell young writers, the best piece of advice I can give them is never self-edit anything. Don't ever look at anything until it's done. Like, you gotta write a whole book to know if it's any good or not. And you gotta write a whole book to understand what it is and what it needs to, how it needs to be fixed, or if it does at all. And it's the same thing. If you let the external world come into what you do, I think it just fucks you up and prevents you from doing it.
Maybe you could say like how the experience was different with your first book when there was no expectation and no reputation.
I think that I would divide my sort of professional life into writing and being a writer. And I really like the first one, and the second is all the work, I love you, but I know, that I undertake on behalf of my work. So I don't really have much of a sense of me as the writer out there, and when I'm working, I'm never thinking about, I mean, I've had people ask, who is your audience? You know, I'm thinking, well, I don't know, me first. And you know, it's a drag. You know, I go there and I don't want to think about anything else except for what I'm working on, and I rarely do. As James said, it's disruptive. And I think one thing that's been useful for me is that while I care about how my work is received or perceived, I really don't care about what people think of me. I mean, I could care less. Sorry. About my work, yes, but so that the personal attacks or anything seem to me to have nothing really to do with what I do.
And no different now from when you started?
I think it, well, different in some ways. I remember when my first novel came out, somebody telling me that Gore Vidal used to leave the country when he had a novel and he never looked at any of his reviews, and I thought, I don't believe that. Now? An excellent strategy. I think that the kind of drubbing I took when The Kiss came out was useful because I was somebody who was very naive about media. I literally thought that a journalist was an honorable person who tried. No, I know this is funny, but I thought that a journalist was an honorable person who tried to present the truth. So I was really not in any way prepared for slander, being quoted out of context, and all those things. And I think it underscored what I understood already was that I have control over one thing, and that's the words I put on the paper. And as soon as it's gone out of my hands, I really have very little control about what happens. And I think I'm pretty good at keeping my head in the sand because I need to.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing that I kind of love about what we get to do is like, I think I talked about it in the thing with you. It's like we all have our lives, and we all have shit in our lives that sucks, and shit in our lives that's hard, and shit in our lives that scares us or makes you insecure or whatever. But when I sit down, like, so much of our life is out of our control. But when I sit down in front of a computer with a blank screen, I am in absolute and total control of what I do. There's not going to be a letter that shows up without me putting it there. And it's like a real, it's kind of sounds corny or whatever, but it's a profound thing once you have it. Like to know that there's this thing in your life that nobody can fuck with unless you let them. And that you have absolute and total control over. Once the book's out, like, whatever.
Yeah, well, it's sort of dead in a way.
That's
And
so
once
funny.
you can't change it, I do feel like it's something.
You mean you don't do what I do, which is run to the printer and say, wait, no, just that one sentence.
I've done it. Actually, when my third novel came out, I sat at Random House, I called up and I said, there's a thing in the galley that really needs to go out. And I said, it's on page. And so she goes, well, that's fine, we'll take care of it. I said, everyone needs to be crossed out. She said, okay. I said, I think I better come in and do it myself. And she said, really? I said, yes, I have to come in and do it myself. So I remember just showing up and
You actually did?
Oh yeah, hundreds.
That's really
And then looking
funny.
at me like,
Yeah, it's funny because for me, it's exactly the opposite of what you two said. I don't care about reviews. I only care about what people think of me. And and sitting and writing is the only time I am out of control, which I love. I'm working on it, but both of those things are true for me. I mean, having written, well, I think all three of us write nonfiction and fiction. You write essays sometimes and stuff, right?
I don't think about what I do in that way.
Yeah.
Like,
I hate to break it to you, James, but some people do.
that's cool. I just say I write shit.
Yeah. Well, okay, so my point being, having Kathryn and I have both written fiction and nonfiction books, journalism books, and novel. Well, I've written one novel and Kathryn's written a bunch, but I actually feel like in both cases, but more with fiction, all that, when you were saying things sound cheesy, when you're quoting what writers say, and writers say, I'm a vessel, and it just flows through me. I actually have had moments of that in fiction. I mean, the ending of my novel was exactly the opposite of what I had planned up to that day, up to the moment that it actually came out. And much as I was fighting it, I did lose control, which, happens once every 35, 40 years for me, and I really appreciate it. It's nice.
I used to be really scared when that happened.
Yeah.
And I remember with my second novel, I had the whole idea what it was going to be.
Can you name it just so we can place it in time?
Poison, which was inspired by historical characters. Mary Louise de Bourbon was the niece of the Sun King. She was married off to the last of the Habsburgs and died a miserable death in Spain. So I did in the research, and research is interesting too because it's sort of, you start interacting with the research and starts pushing you in directions or showing you things that you didn't see before. and I discovered there was a silk industry in Spain, which struck me as so odd that I couldn't help but do, even though it had nothing to do with what I was working on. This happens every time. And then Francisca, who ends up narrating the whole book, popped out of that research, and it was, now I was like sort of trying to strangle her and get her back in the box. And then I just gave up, and now I'm sort of waiting around for that person to come and rescue me when I'm at my desk. It's not, just because I like being in the passenger seat and sort of thinking, wow, this is where we're going.
Yeah.
Seriously, I know nothing about what I'm about to do when I sit down to write a book. It might be in my head, but not in any.
You don't
Yeah.
outline everything.
No, I don't outline
You
everything.
just know. You've already.
Yeah.
Like
written
unlike
it in your
you,
head.
I don't I don't outline, and I don't ever read what I write. So I've never in my life opened a book I've written and read it cover to cover. Like the only time I read it is when I read it in public. And my first book got heavily edited. The last three, except for one part of this book I wrote about California, the last three were literally what came out of they got copy edited, and that was it. And Bright Shiny Morning, my agent was the first person to read it, and there was this big chunk in the middle of it, and he was like, you should take that 40-page section out. And that was the only thing that was.
And what did you say?
I said, all right.
You're an easygoing guy here.
Not really. I mean, an easygoing guy doesn't refuse to be edited. Like, I tell the people, like, you get what you get, and there's no discussion. And I don't look at it except for the copy editing, which I usually do like 3/4 of it, and I get tired of it, and I'm like, just fucking do whatever you think.
Yeah, I have a friend who's a writer friend who, when the Iraq War started, she said, I don't know why they're bothering with bombs. They should just make them read their copy edited pages. They'd surrender. So, given that both of you write about controversial topics as well as gathering controversy around you, do you feel like in order to do that, and when I say controversial, in your case, I'm not just talking about The Kiss or all the works that came from that story. I think everything you do has a really strong aspect of looking at it from an angle that no one has looked at it from before, and it feels like characters are popping out of research you didn't plan to do and all that. So what I'm wondering for both of you is what kind of burden that puts on the craft aspect of what you do. Both of you have distinct styles. When you write fiction or nonfiction, I mean, to me, the mark of a really great writer is you can open a book in a brown paper cover and know whose book that is. And I would say about both of you that that's true. So I'm wondering about craft and controversy. And I mean, you've already said you don't give a shit. You're just going to write what you have to write. And you're not thinking about, well, I better make sure it's the best book it can be because I'm talking about addiction and recovery, and therefore people are going to be looking at this with more scrutiny.
I mean, I like polarization. Like when you were talking about reviews, like I read all of mine, and I always say, like, if there's a day where they're either all good or all bad or all in the middle, like that's a problem. Like I want them to be at the extremes.
Why?
Because it means you confronted somebody in some way, and you fucked with them, either in a good way or a bad way. Like I like it when people hate my shit, like as much as I like it when they love it. What I never want anybody to be able to do is just be like, eh.
And how does craft play into that? How much work do you put into?
I don't like, I mean, it's easy to offend people. It's easy to be controversial if you want to be. Like I wrote this book about the Messiah, and it would have been really easy to make it far more controversial than it was. But what was important was making it right. Like, and if you just write about certain things, or you write, even if you write in a weird way, like people are gonna have problems with it. In my case, a lot of people just have problems with me, and that's cool too. But I always read the reviews and don't hide from them at all. And like, one of my probably my closest friend is this painter, Richard Prince. And we always literally talk much more about the bad reviews than the good ones. We'll be like, dude, did you see what they fucking said? That shit was awesome. I don't know, it's just like, I guess when I've talked, my heroes when I was a kid were not the people that you wanted to hug. Like I liked Henry Miller, and I liked Jack Kerouac, and I liked Baudelaire and Rimbaud, and you know, those were all people who, while they were alive, there were pretty, you know, was considered pretty radical for the time it was in, was misunderstood for the most part, and polarized opinion. You know, like Marvin Hagler was my childhood idol. People you either loved Marvin, he was the middleweight champ in the 80s. You either loved Marvin Hagler or you hated him.
In the book, you told me you worked with a picture of him on the wall.
I do. I have a picture of him. She sees my office every day. I have a picture of Marvin Hagler literally in front of my desk from Sports Illustrated cover in 1985. And the cover is of Marvin Hagler with his middleweight championship belt. One of them there, one of them over this arm, and one over this arm. And it just says, the best and the baddest. And when I was a kid, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up, but whatever it is, I'm going to be the fucking best, and I'm going to be the baddest.
Good job.
Thanks.
And with you, Kraft?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand the
Yeah,
question.
I don't care about the question.
Well, I just sort of think about it. And, you know, form is content in some ways, and I think that my nonfiction tends to be more stripped down than the fiction, and especially in a book like The Kiss, when the aesthetic, you know, I knew it had to be short because there was only so much people could take, and I wanted to strip away any details that would obstruct what I felt was sort of an archetypal triangle, and of course I wanted to protect my father and his family from anybody knowing anything about them, so it served dual purpose in that sense, which was very lucky. But I don't think any aspect of craft is really influenced by the outside world. More
So you
the
find this-
demands of the work itself.
So with each book, there's a particular
Yeah.
challenge, and how are you going to pull this thing off? What
Yeah,
are the
and sadly,
areas?
whatever you learned on the last one isn't going to apply, so.
Yeah, it's funny, I was being driven here,
It's never like that word's going to excite people or make people mad. It's that word's right. And it's like just trying to get word after word after word right. And part of getting them right is, if you get them right, they will do those things.
they will do what they...
Polarize people.
Is that important to you? How do you feel about polarization or your work creating?
It's hard to understand, I mean, it's hard to know how you're perceived, but I think that I am a writer people tend to have strong opinions about. And I like James, I like that. I mean, you don't want somebody just sort of like, oh, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
And I don't mind when people are angry with me as long as they're the right people. That's enough.
This is the first book I've ever published that's not pissing anybody off, and I hardly know what to do with myself. I wake up in the morning like ready to, girded, and then it's like, oh, it's a nice book about writing. It's really helpful. Thank you. Okay then.